Now we're live.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's exciting to be here today. It's been a while. I think we've not had a session in about 2 months, so this is nice. And I have today with me an amazing individual. I'm so proud to be connected to her. I met a couple of weeks back, and the conversation has been mind blowing. Hi, everyone. Once again, my name is Bumi Bossade, as you all know me. And this is LSI. And today we'll be talking about a very interesting topic and conversation around mental health and the youth. We all would agree that there's a lot going on within the mental health space, and sometimes as African parents and guiding, we kind of shy away from it, and sometimes we don't shy away from it, but we're kind of confused on how to help, what to do, where to come in. So that's why we're having this conversation today. And before we dive in, I would ask the guest to please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. My name is Tolu Omayofa. I'm currently like a first year psychiatry resident at McMaster University. And I really am passionate about mental health. I've been ever since I was younger. So I was really excited when I got the call that let's talk about mental health. And I'm really hoping that through this conversation, that one, we get more comfortable helping one another when we have mental health struggles and challenges, but most importantly that we kind of start to normalize mental health in our community, especially as like Black people. It's really hard sometimes to kind of like be able to understand what's happening, but yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Tolu. It's amazing that you have agreed to join us. So thank you for joining us today. Just before we kind of dive into the questions, how was your week?
Oh, my week was good, very busy, but it was good. What about you? How was your week?
It was good. I was really looking forward to the 4 days, straight out of work. So
Yeah.
yeah, for me, it was good. Thanks.
Yeah. It's always good to have like the long weekends where you just like you can relax for a little bit before diving back into work.
Yes, yes. So thank you for joining us once again. And yes, my first question to you: what exactly is mental health? What exactly? And now we're talking in regards the youth. Our focus today is the youth. So tell us, what exactly is mental health?
That's such a great question because I think that, especially talking to like the youth and teenagers, I think when I think of mental health, the simplest way I can put it is when you refer to someone's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So you think about the little three things that kind of encompass your day-to-day living. So how are you doing in terms of like where you live, where you stay, how you feel, how you're functioning in your environment. So all those three things together like make up like someone's mental health. And when it comes to the youth, there's a lot of different things that can affect that. So you can imagine if you don't have like a stable household, or like there's always fights going on, or there's like food insecurity, or there's not a lot of like things at home that make you safe, then that affects like your mental health, because it's one of those three umbrellas that we look at, right? When we talk about psychologically, if we have like lower self-esteem issues, or you look at yourself a certain way based on what you're seeing in media, that can also affect your day-to-day functioning, right? And when we talk about emotionally, like a lot of times people are not kind of in tune with their emotions, and like, why am I feeling what I'm feeling? Like, if I'm angry, is it because of this situation, or is there an underlying feeling? So I think when it comes to the youth, it really like encompasses a lot of those three facets, but then that also trickles into like how we relate to other people. So if I'm stressed, I have like a stressful situation at home, or I'm stressed with school, or psychological, emotionally, I'm dealing with like some anxiety or depression. It really affects my ability to show up on a day-to-day basis, to relate to my parents, to relate to my friends, to be able to like do well and like, achieve my goals. So I think that like mental health is not just like this thing of like, oh, you're sad, you're depressed. No, it's actually a thing of like all three factors. Like, we always talk about your spiritual, emotional, physical, financial well-being as adults, and it matters to you as like your younger person, like a youth, a teenager, someone in the early 20s, or even when you're like in like kindergarten, like all of those things really matter because those are the foundation that you build on to become a successful adult in the future. So I'm trying not to ramble on because I can go on and on. So I hope that kind of is clear a little bit as
It
to like how
is.
I look at mental health.
It is, and thank you for pointing that out. Because sometimes, as African parents, we think of mental health and we think of this person is delusional, this person is crazy. Permit me
Mm-hmm.
to use that word,
No, that's
and
okay.
we don't kind of look at it from the angle of it could be emotional struggles, it could be
Mm-hmm.
psychological struggles, it
Mm-hmm.
could even be issues around, the home, at
Mm-hmm.
school,
Yeah.
with friends, and
Mm-hmm.
all those could all add up. So for me, my next question probably would be, what angle do you see the most? Like, what's that aspect of mental health that you encounter the most in your profession? You deal with a lot of youth, we deal with, people that have mental health issues, and
Mm-hmm.
particularly the youth. Where is that frequent issues of mental health coming from?
Yeah, that's such a good question. As we probably all know, like mental health issues are kind of on the rise now. Like I think like back a couple of years ago, I like saw something that like by like 2030 or something, it's gonna be like the number one like epidemic or pandemic that like in terms of like health issues that's affecting the world. In terms of youth, I think a lot of the things we deal with right now, especially with the rise of social media, a lot of people think they have ADHD, a lot of people think they have anxiety. A lot of people think they have depression. A lot of people have like a lot of like personality structures that kind of all stem from like a lot of times our upbringing, right? Like I always like to kind of go back to the foundation because I feel like anything that is happening to us in terms of our mental health is just a symptom of an underlying issue, right? People just don't wake up and they're depressed. People just don't wake up and they're anxious, right? People just don't wake up and like they're hearing voices or they're seeing things or they have an inability to focus or concentrate. It came from something, right? And that's why earlier on, I'm glad you asked that question as to like what mental health is, because it's really that like foundational structure of like emotional, psychological, and social well-being. And I feel like that's something in our community that a lot of the times, especially in our Black community, that we've not been able to kind of be more attuned to. So when our kids grow up, they're really struggling with this issue of like their emotional, psychological, and social well-being, but like they can't even discuss it with their parents or like their loved ones because it's an emphasis on like, hey, go to school, do well, but and obviously I understand the importance of that, but I also think that like what makes somebody thrive and succeed in life is when we look into their comprehensive care. So something I think of just right now even talking would be like, when you're a little kid and let's say you do something really bad, and as I think people should be disciplined and corrected, but I think a lot of times in our African culture, you're just like, oh, you just yell at the kid and you're like, okay, yeah, like go sit in your room, or you punish them, or you take away their phone, and all that stuff. And now, like with that kid, most of the time they're okay. Like they just learn to do like, okay, if something is wrong, I'm gonna get yelled at, and that's it, no explanation whatsoever. There's a different approach versus like saying, hey, that wasn't right, this is why it wasn't right. You're still going to get punished because you need to understand that actions have consequences, but rather I'm going to still create that safe space for you to know that it's okay for you to make a mistake. So now that kid, every time going forward in their life, now they're afraid to make a mistake. Now you've created a more anxious person. So then in life, anytime they're at work, they're at school, they make a mistake, they start to like fret, they start to worry, they start to panic. And before you know it, like torpedoes. So God forbid they make a very big mistake that affects them. They don't know how to function or recover. So then I see that person in like, in the hospital or like in the clinic, and now they have like this very like paralyzing anxiety. And then when we start to pull back the layer, it came from the fact that when they were a little kid, their emotional, psychological, and social well-being was not really was not really catered to in the way that it should have been. And I have understanding that like obviously parents do the best that they can with the knowledge that they have. So that's why I'm really happy that we're having this conversation, because hopefully we can start to break that cycle. And that's that with like, anxiety. I can think of like depression, for example, when kids like some kids are just naturally more emotional as they're growing up, they like cry at little things. I still have like family members where like they'll tell boys like, don't cry, don't do this, don't do that. And for me, it's like, no, like let them cry now, because they can understand that crying in itself is not that bad, but like how can you use it to kind of like process your emotion and then move forward. But if you're telling people not to do certain things, you kind of stifle that. So then that guy grows up and has a lot of anger issues. A lot of people don't know that anger is actually a secondary emotion. So when people say, oh, this guy's always angry, or like the teenager, like the especially teenage boys in our society, they have this like repetition of being angry and like, not really paying attention, not really following rules, is because as a kid, a lot of times when they were exhibiting like emotions, you were telling them not to. So like you're shoving that the primary emotions of actually feeling sad or happy or upset, and you're making them to build and rely on their secondary emotion, which is anger, and like not being able to process that. Then we see that kid when they grow up and they have a lot of like, anger issues. They're getting in trouble with the law. They're not listening, and like they're being disruptive in class. And then you wonder why. It's because like there was not that structure when they were growing up. And then we also talk about like in terms of like social media, right? Like we live in a day and age where like social media is very much prominent, prevalent in our faces. Like everyone has social media, and like a lot of the things on social media that kids are relating to on these days creates this very unrealistic expectation. I was talking to like a grade 8 or a grade 9 year old the other day, and they were like telling me like, oh yeah, like I want to have this designer stuff. And I was like, when I was 13, I was not even thinking of like, getting like a fancy like $30,000 purse. Like I was just thinking, can I please get my first phone? And so like things are changing, expectations have been like raised, and like it just creating a very, very stressful situation for the young adults and youth today to be in. So in summary, there's a lot of different factors that play into, every time I see a patient come in or I see someone, I'm like, okay, like the way we do it is we pick back the layers as to like what happened to lead you for me seeing you here. And oftentimes always a combination of like their upbringing, their environment, or whatever happened to them at school, if they were bullied, if they had a lot of friends, if they didn't, their social functioning, how they see themselves. Maybe an auntie made a comment. For example, like in our culture, in the culture I come from anyway, there's a lot of like fat shaming. So like if somebody's on the bigger side, they're like, oh, you're fat, you're this, you're that. And like the more they say that to that person, even if that kid initially did not see themselves as that way, the more someone tells you you're something, the more you start to believe it, right?
Yeah.
You start to like become like it. So it becomes your identity, and then you start to see yourself in a certain way. And then you combine your aunties and uncles are telling you you're fat, you're this. Then you go on social media is telling you you're this, you're that, right? And then you go to school, people are making fun of you for this and that. Like then it all encompasses, and then you have this teenager who is depressed, having low self-esteem issues. When you see yourself a certain way, and we can get into that later, some of the signs to kind of watch for when someone is depressed or anxious, then of course I can't focus on school because I'm not really thinking about that. I'm thinking that everyone hates me, even though most of the time probably no one is really like paying that much attention. So I really think that like it's so important that we kind of peel back the layers and understand that like there's so many different factors that can happen. Another thing that I'm even thinking about, I don't want to forget to mention, is trauma. Trauma is something that happens a lot in our society, in our community, that a lot of people don't talk about. Like they're losing like a parent or like a family member at a young age, and everyone just being like, oh, it is well, like not really helping you process that grief or that loss. Or sometimes it's like sexual abuse, like aunties or uncles like touching like their nephews or their nieces, or family members touching people inappropriately. You have situations where people have come up to me and say, oh, this happened, and my parents were just like, let's not talk about it. That changes a child. That changes the way you grow up, the way you move through life, and also understanding that these things do happen, like it's real. And I feel like sometimes in our community, we just want to like cover it up and like not talk about it, and it's not real. And even in terms of like when there's a lot of conflict in the home, when the dad and the mom are always fighting all the time, or there's that one sibling that's always fighting with the parents, conflict in general creates a very unstable environment, and that affects the way kids.
I have to put that down. Conflict in general creates a very unstable environment.
Yeah,
Okay.
it does. Like it really does. I have like friends or people who, anytime they start to see someone fight, they start to get anxious because it reminds them of like growing up. Like dad and mom used to fight all the time. Or some people don't like hearing loud noises. They'll be like, "Don't yell at me," because it triggers them, right? Like, and also like just in general, another thing I think about is the pressures we put on ourselves, on our kids as they grow like older too. Like, as soon as like a kid is 4 or 5, what do you want to be when you grow up? You better be this, you better be that. And it's just kind of like, how about it just be a child, right? Like, like it's okay. And honestly, I'm all for excellence in everything that I do, but I also feel like there has to be a balance. There has to be a way where you're like, oh, it's okay if you don't do this right away, but like, let's work towards it. Don't automatically, if like somebody, your kid comes home and like they have a 90, say, oh, like, you're a failure, like you're this, you're that, like those kind of words or those kind of things that we do build this environment where people don't grow up feeling safe and secure. And lastly, before I stop rambling on, I think it's so important to also know that like our mental health affects our physical health, right? And I feel like because sometimes we don't see it right away, people don't pay attention to it. But sometimes when you're depressed and when you're anxious, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not sleeping, you're not eating. Sometimes in social media now, a lot of people are like anorexic or that dealing with like eating disorders. So kids are starving themselves. That can affect like your body, your electrolytes, your way to like the way you function. It can affect, it can cause irregular rhythm in your heart. Like there's a lot of things that our physical health really, 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 really does intertwine with our mental health. But sometimes people don't see that because you don't see your mind outside of your body. So you don't think it matters. But every part of you matters because your body, your mind, your psychological needs, your physical needs, everything intertwines together to create an healthy, thriving youth or like person in society, right? So I think it's really important. So yeah, there's a lot of factors that can go into people just like struggling with their mental health, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Wow, you've said so much in a very short time.
Sorry.
But I love, no, that's great. Like, I love the fact that you pointed out us going back to the root. I would call it the root cause.
Yes.
Like going back to the basis. Where did this start from?
Mm-hmm.
How did this come about? And not taking it from the surface,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just going deep and saying, okay, let's take a step back. Let's
Yeah.
start from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
How did this happen? When did this begin to happen? And that kind of would help kind of give an informed clarity to what exactly is
Mm-hmm.
the reason this child or this youth
Mm-hmm.
have this anxiety issue or
Yeah.
social well-being issue or
Mm-hmm.
psychological issue as it
Yeah.
may be. Now, for us, African parent, I can speak to Nigerian parents because I am one.
Mm-hmm.
We have this very I'm religious. I don't want to use the word religious, but I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
I love God.
Mm-hmm.
I am born again.
Yeah.
I believe in God and I believe
Mm-hmm.
in prayers. But as Christians or as African parents, sometimes we would I want to be careful with my words, but we ascribe everything to spirituality.
Yeah.
We take everything to that, that's the first thing we're thinking about. That's the first, and it's good. It's good as children of God to believe in God and to
Yeah.
take all our worries to God. But I
Mm-hmm.
also will tell people that, see, God have created this excellent minds
Mm-hmm.
to deal with some issues because he doesn't want you to come to him with every issue you have. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
we have doctors,
Yeah.
right? That's why we have lawyers. That's why we
Mm-hmm.
have engineers and we have
Yeah.
scientists and the computer,
Mm-hmm.
wizards that would, invent things that
Yeah.
make life easier for us.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you kind of in your profession, you deal with a lot of youths,
Mm-hmm.
and probably parents would also come in. How do you have you encountered this situation, and how do you help kind of reconstruct their thinking to say, you know what, mom, dad, yes, God is key and all that, but I think we should look at it from this aspect. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question, honestly, because I'm Christian too. I love Jesus so much. Like, I honestly, like, I don't even think of a life for me personally where like God is not in it. Like I feel like it's so important. It kind of guides and does everything I do. Even choosing psychiatry as my specialty, like that was a God decision. And I love the fact that we're talking about this because I think especially in the Christian community, there's this stigma of like, oh, mental health is not real. Let's just pray about it and you'll be fine. And I always think about like that. I always think of there's so many times in the Bible that God is like, no, I do care about your mental health and I do want you to be okay. Like the Bible says that, I want you to be well, to be but like abundantly well, to giving you abundant life. And when I think about abundant life, that means that I'm thriving body, spirit, mind, and soul. And I'm gonna kind of share from my own personal experience. I also grew up in a very religious home, but something I really appreciated growing up was like as religious as my parents are, very Christian. They still allowed us to kind of have room to kind of like experience and like the emotions that we felt. And I really think that like that made the difference into like me growing up and really understanding like a lot of things. In terms of like parents and how to kind of marry your spirituality or marry your relationship with God in terms of like your mental health, I think one normalize like understanding that like God wants us to really take care of ourselves, right? And it's very simple. I think sometimes we kind of overcomplicate a lot of things. And you've said that if God did not want us to have psychiatrists or to have medications or to have doctor, then there wouldn't be a need for us. But God knows that like he's not going to come down himself. He's going to use people. He's going to use vessels, as we all are in all of our different profession to really tackle the problem. For example, like we look at David in the Bible as like, this amazing man of God that everyone like raised about. But a lot of the book of the Psalms was David going through a lot of like depressive, anxiety filled episodes, right? And yes, he did one thing that I think we don't do enough was that he always expressed it. He always talked about it. And I feel like when we take back to our real world right now, we don't talk about things. We just try to go to God and we bottle it up. But like a lot of the times, remember even when like Elijah was like, what's it called? Very upset and was like, I want to die in the Bible. And God was like, you know what? Yeah, you're gonna be fine. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Yeah, take some food because the journey ahead is like so long. Like people think that like when they come to the doctor, to the psychiatrist, or they see therapists, like we're just like shoving medications at a lot of the times we believe in the combination of like medication and therapy and talking about it. So for example, I'll use depression as an example because it's something like that is common. When somebody comes and they're saying that, oh, like I'm not feeling great, like my mood has been this, I'm not sleeping well, blah, blah, blah. We start to think of like things that we can help you to change in that moment. So I'm thinking, one, me and if I haven't slept, I'm very cranky, I'm not functioning. If you're talking to me, I'm more like I have a shorter fuse. I'm like, like what are you saying? But so now if someone says I've not been sleeping because I've been up at night, my thoughts like are going like 1 million miles per hour. I'm like, okay, how can we get you some sleep? Thankfully, there's a lot of medications that can help you sleep that you don't have to be dependent on it. So I'll give you something for sleep. Okay, my mood is feeling really low. I'm not really able to go out and enjoy things with my friends because of this and this and that. If that what the root cause of the issue is something that we can change, we're like, okay, it's because you don't like your living environment. Let's see how we can help you to get into a new different environment. If it's like you are adjusting to like having moved to a new country, for example, a lot of us are like immigrants, or your parents immigrated and then you just came along. That transition can be tough for a lot of people because you're living your way of life and coming to like a different country, society, community, values, ideas might not necessarily match. So like how can we make sure that, okay, maybe I can connect you with resources through our social worker to make sure that you have a community of like other people that just move, like new immigrants. So like when we start to look at those things as like, but does that exclude the fact that I believe in God? No. Me connecting to like a group of like people who just recently moved or not does not change the fact that I can still go to church on Sunday and pray. Me taking medication to sleep or me taking medication to boost my mood, because at the end of the day, what people don't understand too is that a lot of the depression, the anxiety is actually a lot of neurochemicals in your brain. So it's not just like things that you made up or in your head. So if those levels are low or sometimes too high, and I'm giving you something to help you kind of stay balanced, that doesn't mean that you believe in God any less, Or if I'm saying, hey, maybe you need to talk to a therapist to have coping skills, because life is tough, and sometimes your mom can help you and dad can help you, but they are professionals who have gone to school, who have trained for this. Just like if you're having a heart attack, you're not going to be like, oh, doctor, don't save me, God is going to heal me. You're going to die. That's just the reality. And you can't blame God that, oh, God did not save you. No, God gave this brilliant doctor the tools, the knowledge to be able to save you from dying from this heart attack, but you refused because you were waiting from God to come, you're waiting on God to come down from heaven. So in the same way, because I have to kind of be very blunt about this, in the same way, when people are struggling with their mental health, I believe that you can marry prayer. Like, you can pray, because I do believe in the power of prayer, but I also believe that how can we be active, right? We talk about actively working out our salvation day in, day out. And I think this is part of it. I can believe in God and like have faith, but I also have to do something about it. And I think about all the great people in the Bible that we really, really love. As much as like Abraham had faith that, okay, God was sending me to a land, if he didn't take the first step and move, nothing was going to happen, right? Like, we wouldn't have this great man of God. Like, if you think about David, how he was like fighting off the lions, doing all these things, if he did not have the faith to be like, yeah, I can actually step into fighting Goliath. Yes, God is backing me, but let me actually take that step. Then we would not really like be here, or like really be talking about these great people. I can go on and on like about like a lot of people in the Bible who really exemplify that it's not enough to just like say, oh, I trust in God, but they actually did something about it. So in the same way, when we are facing struggles and challenges in our mental health, yes, I want us to pray. I advocate for us to pray. We advocate for people in general to really connect with their spiritual resources. Like, that's part of the things that we advocate for. But in the same way, we can have all these things working together. I can believe that God is the author and finisher of my faith, but also have other things that help augment that help, like, make that like feel better, And I feel like that's something that we need to start like being more open-minded to, understanding that like you can believe in God, you can also believe in medications and therapy. And this is not only with mental health. I think in general, sometimes people, because I'm still doing like regular medicine, sometimes people kind of are very reluctant to taking medication for like their heart problems, their kidney issues, and all that stuff. And I'm like, God can heal you, right? Like, doctors are not perfect. We don't know everything. God gives us all knowledge. But at the same time, like, the knowledge that we do have has come from God. So let us use that knowledge to kind of help you get to where you need to be, right? Because for you to be the God best version of yourself, for you to be the purpose, like the purposeful person that God has created you to be, you need to be able to be emotionally, physically, mentally okay. And able to be able to do that, we need to kind of use the tools that are available for us right now. So I hope that answers the question. Because
yeah, it does excellently well.
In terms of like, somebody that's like, I call myself the Jesus baby. Like, I really do believe that like God really, really cares about our mental health, and he cares about like the way we also show up, and the way. And another thing that I'm even thinking about now is, imagine if the world can take the cues from us as Christians about our mental health. Imagine if a lot of the times when people talk about mental health, we can start to like take those cues of like, oh, Christians believe in God, and they believe in, their God has the ability to save, and he can heal, and he can do all these things, but they also would take medications, right? But sometimes like we feel the stereotype. We say, oh no. And it's not just Christians. There's a lot of other religions. I've come across a lot of other faith who also don't believe in like medications, or they don't believe that like this is a real thing. They're like, we're gonna pray about it, or we're gonna go to our like gods. So I think that like for us, we just have to be open-minded, understanding that God has given us resources here on earth. It's like saying you don't want to go to the bank because like God is saying that I've already given you all the wealth in this world, blah, blah, blah. You still need to go to the bank to get the wealth. Like, wealth is not going to supernaturally fall into, like, you still need to access it, right? So I think that if we can change our perspective, thinking of, okay, this is a resource that God has put you on earth, and I'm using it I'm going to access it to become the best version of myself. I think that, like, that would be a good way to kind of get started in breaking the stereotypes and the stigma.
Thank you so much. Like, you were spot on. As in, me and you, we are on the same
I'm glad.
level when it comes to that. But you mentioned something very, very interesting, and I don't want to forget it. And this is one of our main focus and purpose and objective with LSI. Now, you mentioned you've had situations where you have probably immigrants come in
Mm-hmm.
and they say, I'm not sure what's going on. It could be anxiety, it could be depression,
Yeah.
and it's a new environment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not sure of what exactly is going on with me and all that. And while you were talking, it just kind of resonated with me because I always say this. And as parents, right, it's easier for us to be able to figure that out,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we bring these kids, especially the kids that are a little bit older, that now
Yeah.
understands what's going on.
Yeah.
The 9 years old,
Mm-hmm.
the eight, the 10, the 12 and above, they
Yeah.
come with us into a different country as
Yeah.
immigrants. And they're struggling. I
Mm-hmm.
can tell you for sure, they're struggling really hard with a
Yeah.
lot of things. Now they're in school and probably they're the
Mm-hmm.
only black person in the class. They've always been in school with people that look like them, that talk
Yeah.
like them. And
Mm-hmm.
now sometimes they even know the answer to questions asked in class, but because they're scared of, okay, if I speak now because of my accent, would they laugh
Yes, of
at me?
course.
Would they make
Yeah.
fun of me? If I go
Mm-hmm.
approach my teacher, would my teacher understand? Or
Yeah.
will she know what I'm talking about? For them
Mm-hmm.
having or making friends, it's like a lot of things are going on in their mind,
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. I wanna.
in
Yes.
their head,
I.
and they're
Yeah.
not able to talk about it. They're not able.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally understand as parents, we come in and the first thing in our mind is, oh God, how do I get a job? How do we get a house? How do
Yeah.
we settle? How do we buy our first property?
Yeah.
How do we get a car? The
Mm-hmm.
weather here is extremely difficult. I need a
Yeah.
car. And how do I pay bills? And
Mm-hmm.
all those things are running through our head.
And
And
your
we
kids.
forget
Yeah.
these kids that
Mm-hmm.
comes in with us. And this is where, for me, this is the genesis of where all the struggles come from, especially for us immigrants,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So how do you identify issues like this, and what would be your advice for us as parents? Because even me myself, I'm not exempted in this
Yeah.
particular concern.
Mm-hmm.
I am not.
Yeah, I think that's such a great topic. I'm so glad he came up because um, it's an issue near and dear to my heart. I remember moving to Canada when I was younger. Like my family's in Regina, Saskatchewan, which like is probably a lot of people asking like, oh my God, Regina, and I'm like, yeah. And I remember at one time like it was like me, my sister, and like maybe two or three other black people in my entire school. Thankfully, I lived in another country previously where I had a lot of like exposure to like a lot of Caucasian people. So the move wasn't maybe as jarring for me, but I can also relate to the fact that like it's different when for the first time in your life, like when you move to a new country. So like a lot of my friends who moved directly just from like Nigeria here would say that I didn't even realize that I was black until I moved here. Then like I look at the color of my skin and I'm like, oh, I guess something is different. Like, like I am different. And then like you are treated like you said, like you start to think about the way you speak. Because then people be like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. Or can you say that one more time? And then you don't have a lot of things in common with them because just like them, you didn't grow up playing hockey. You don't know a single thing about hockey. You don't know, a single thing about skating. You maybe haven't watched the same Disney TV shows that they watched growing up. So now you feel othered. You feel left out. Like even if you're trying to like fit in, it's like, but there's not a lot for you to relate. And as human beings, like when we have a common connection, is what really makes us thrive, right? Like when we think about good things that are great connectors of people, music, sports, culture. So when you move to a new environment, there's a lot to adjust to because, like I said, in Canada, there's like a big like hockey culture, whereas back home in a lot of like African countries, it's more like soccer, like
Yeah,
football, right?
football.
Or what the type of music we listen to here is kind of like more hip hop, R&B kind of like based, whereas there it's more like Afro beats, like all that stuff. And like yes, there's some like hip hop and stuff that people listen to, but like as always, the culture is what connects people in a place, right? So like the culture and the way of life, the way you do things, it's different. Yeah, maybe like it's not as like respectful and all that stuff, like but there like I remember like obviously growing up, like you always call everybody like Mr., Mrs., Auntie, Uncle. And I remember like some of my Caucasian friends be like, wow, Cholu, you have so many aunties and uncles. And I'm like, oh, it's just like it's just like a thing. Like, they're not really like my auntie and uncle, but like, like in like the Nigerian culture, when people are older than you, as a sign of respect, you say this. So like having to tell my friends like, hey, listen, when you come to my house, you can't call my parents Paul and Florence. Like you can't do that. Like, you address them respectfully. Just like little things like that, like little nuances that like no one tells you about, especially as a kid moving to a new environment. Because like you said, the parents, they have different priorities. Like, well, how do we survive? How do we adjust? How do we, get settled? But I think like a lot of kids get lost there. And what ends up happening is that kids kind of have this dual identity where like, you kind of feel like you don't really fit in with like a lot of the people in your classes, because predominantly a lot of them don't look like you, they don't talk like you, they don't have the same interest. Or like even people will be like the food that they bring to school, like some kids will be like, oh, that smells funny, or like, what is that, right? And versus like, if you were back home, everyone was eating the exact same meal, so it wasn't like a big deal, like everyone liked the same thing, you were able to kind of relate on like the same different, like the same things. And now you're coming here and you're not able to. And I think a lot of times parents, because they're so busy, understandably so, they don't take a minute to kind of ask their kid like how they're doing,
Yes.
And I think like for me, a lot of things in life is not that complicated. It's actually very simple. I remember there was a situation where I know somebody that was getting bullied at school, and because like they've been bullied, and they kind of like stood up for themselves. Like they told the teacher of course didn't say anything, because that does happen. And then eventually one day, like this kid fought back, right? And then so they called their parents and they're like, hey, like, blah 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 did this, like you need to come. And I really love those parents' responses. So they came to school like, oh yeah, like I've been talking to my kid at home, and he always tells me that this is what happens at school, and you guys never did anything. So I told him to stand up for himself. And that was such a significant turning point for that kid at that school, because then they knew that, hey, listen, number one, you can't mess with this kid. Number two, you can't mess with their parents either, And sometimes parents will even go to school when their kids are in trouble and they start becoming like apologetic. But the reason why you're apologizing for your kid's behavior is because you were never in tune with your kid in the first place. Whereas these parents, their kid, they were leaving room to check on their kid, to be like, hey, listen, how is school going? How are you adopting? Like, and I feel like it's so important that no matter how busy we are, it goes back to the foundation I was saying. When you have an unstable environment where you feel like you're neglected, neglect doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have food or water or shelter. Emotional, like neglecting a child or feeling like you're not paying attention to their emotional needs, can also cause damage, can also like make people grow up thinking, oh, do I really matter? Do like the way like I talk, speak, like no one really cares about me, and then they start having self-esteem issues, right? So I feel like something we can do as new immigrants, as you're coming into a new country, as you're adjusting, making an intentional effort to check in with your kids, even if you can't do it like every single day, but like making sure that like once a week you're like, hey, like let's sit down for like 30 minutes. How are you? Like, how is school? How are you finding everything? I know it's hard, but please, you can always come talk to me if anything is going on. If like you're having trouble at school with like your friends, or if you're having like, let me know, like, yes, I know it's not easy, but let's see how we can kind of build community. Maybe we can like reach out to people. Like being a parent is not just providing for your kids' physical and financial needs. It's making sure that you parent them all the way through, spiritually, emotionally, physically. That's what encompasses a human being. And I feel like sometimes there's an emphasis on this and this, like, how can I get you to the best schools? How can I make sure that you become successful in life? But in order to do all of those things, they need to be also emotionally well and mentally okay and stable. And when you neglect that part of their life, it causes like a ripple effect into what they become eventually. And yes, they become successful and they might become the doctor, the lawyer, the engineer, but there's always be a part of them that's always going to struggle. That's why a lot of people be like, oh, when I was growing up, there was no anxiety and there was no depression. And it's like, yes, there was, but people just didn't talk about it, right? And so I really do feel like a very practical tip I can give is like just once a day, like even like something I love that like the Caucasian people do, and I feel like we can really learn from their part of like their kind of like way of doing things. The ones that actually think choose with their kids, it's like they're constantly texting their kids. Like they actually are friends with their kids. And I feel like a lot of times because of like our cultural dynamics, you're like, oh no, I'm the parent, so I can't be friends with my kids. But you can be. You should be able to like talk to them and like ask them like, hey, like I was cool, I was this. Yes, there should be that respect factor. But at the end of the day, if you see your kid as just like a human being, just like you, they have needs. As you're struggling to find a job, they're also struggling to connect and stay at school. Also, they're struggling to understand their teachers because their teachers speak differently than like their other teachers that they are used to. You know, they are struggling to also fit in to adjust to the weather, having to wear layers and bundles of clothes. Girls are struggling with their hairstyles because kids will make fun of them at school. Boys are like, if they braid it or it looks too scruffy, they are deemed unprofessional. So there's a lot of different things that you're struggling with because automatically moving to this part of the world, there's extra barriers and extra things that you kind of have to fight through. So I think number one thing is talking to your kid, listening to what they actually are saying. Don't listen because let me just do this because I have to do it. They told us to listen, so now I have to listen. But actually listen that you care and that you're able to help them find solutions to some of the things that they're going through. And it's okay if you don't have solutions to issues. Like I was talking to like a friend back when I lived in the States, and they were really going through a lot of issues. And I was just like, auntie, like we clearly can't help her, but there are people who can. So it's always okay to also outsource. If there are things that you know it's beyond your capacity or you don't have the ability to be able to help your kid, you can always direct them or like look for resources to help them. If your kid is struggling with really, really bad clinical depression, we've prayed about it, we've talked about it, you've connected them with people they can talk to, and it's not getting better. Invest in the way you invest in the academics, invest in their well-being, help them get to a therapist, somebody that you can even go to the appointments with them and be like, oh, I'll drive you there, I'll drive you back, I'll pick you up. Like show them that you really genuinely care about them as a human being, right? If your kid is struggling at school, don't be like, oh, like it's because you don't study and you're always playing video games all the time, blah, 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 this and this, that. I'll be like, okay, like what do you think is going on? Like talking to them, because a lot of the times, instead of talking at the person, that doesn't breed solutions. When you talk at someone, it doesn't really necessarily like foster, an healthy way of like finding solutions to the problem. Rather, it just kind of perpetuates the cycle because the person is already like feeling defeated. They're like, oh yeah, I know mom is gonna talk at me. I know dad is gonna say this. So what's the point? But when you actually say, hey, what do you think is the problem? What do you think is going on? What is going on at school that I can help with? You're on social media all the time, but I want to let you know that, you're beautiful, you're strong, you're kind. Like why these things are the standard that the world is painting. Even if you're a Christian, you can be like, hey, but you're a child of God and you're like chosen, you're loved, you're all of these things. And I know the word, this is not what the word is saying, but I want to always reassure you that this is who you are in Christ Jesus. So like marrying, and that's what I'm saying, that there's a space for you to marry your faith. There's a space for you to marry like, the real life application of listening, talking, providing appropriate resources. All of those things can come together and they can help you foster like a better relationship with your kids. So I think that as immigrant parents or like immigrant aunties and uncles, we have responsibility to do more check-ins, to see how people are adapting, to see how they're coping. And even on ourselves, I feel like as adults too, I know we're talking on the youth, but I also see a lot of like older immigrant adults struggling with like a new environment because you spend like 30 something years of your life in this place. You have your family, your friends, your way of life, and then you're moving here. It's tough. So like finding community, like if you can't find community because it's so tough, because everyone is so busy in North America, like everyone just goes to work, come back home, like, reaching out to like resources, going on Google, there's so many free things that the government of Canada offers. And even if you can, like going to your family doctor saying, hey, like I would like to be referred to like, a specialist to talk about these issues like I'm facing, or using, like, I think we're so lucky and fortunate that we can have access to so many resources. And if I always say, like, kind of like what you're doing at LSI, I really love that. If there's a gap and you feel like there's no resources and there's no space, then it's up to us to actually fill those gaps and bridge those gaps and like start to have those conversations. So I do feel like right now, the most important thing is actually having conversations about it, talking to our people, like saying, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? Checking in and genuinely listening. Because people will say, oh, I do ask my kid, like, I was good today. And they say it's fine. I mean, the kid is going to tell you it's fine, but you have to be more specific. Oh, how is school going? You know, how are your friends? What are your friends' name? You know, like, are you liking it? What are you liking now? What are you enjoying? What are you watching on social media? If your kid is likes like a TV show, I always said that growing up, I was obsessed with Justin Bieber. Like, I thought I was gonna get married to him, and yes, I really did. And my Nigerian parents fully supported. Like, they knew it was gonna be a phase. Of course, I was not gonna get married to Justin Bieber, but like, they fully supported like my enjoyment of him. Like, they let me go to his concert. I even missed school the one day. Like, they let me go to his concert in Saskatoon. Like, it was, and I cherish those moments because I'm like, wow, like, it's so important, because now that when I look back and when I have my own kids, I'm gonna let them do the exact same thing. Where I'm gonna be like, you can do your stuff. Like, I know you're not gonna obviously get married to this very random stranger or whatever. And you can have posters on your walls, and you can talk my ears off about, oh, Justin Bieber's new music video just came out, and oh, my friend wants to like go camping, and so little things like that. I feel like at the end of the day, like, it really helps your kid to like thrive and foster. So even when they're having troubles at school, I can still go home and say, oh, like, people at school have been really mean, and I can talk to my parents about that and feel like I have an ally. But imagine if at home you don't have an ally, at school you don't have an ally, in community, at work you don't have an ally, then what are you left with, right? Like, so I really feel like it's so important that we become our kids' biggest allies. That like that stuff starts from home, where we instilled in them that they can always come home, we can always be their friends. Yes, we discipline our kids. Yes, we teach them to respect people. Yes, we teach them the core values and of our culture and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, let's also be their friend, because God is our friend. That's why sometimes when we misbehave and we do a lot of things, God still like talks to us. Like, he still kind of cares about us. He doesn't give up on us. And in the same way, we model that relationship that God has with us with our own kids by talking to them, by having conversation and relationship with them. I think like that was.
Thank you so much. Like, I love how you ended that answer. Being an ally with your child, allyship, it's quite important. And like I say, sometimes people come to me and say, oh, Bumi, all those things you're doing, are you really doing it? Is it something you practice? And I'm like, I myself, when I'm involved in these sessions, I learn as a parent. I'm not perfect. I'm striving to be better. I'm striving to communicate better with my children, to have a better relationship with them. So when I have, conversations like this, it kind of, okay, remember what Tolu said, you have to be an ally. So when that Niger spirit enters me and I start screaming, I'll just take a step back. I'm like, okay, so let's talk. What happened to, but
like, I was still disciplined. Trust me, like, I still got whoopings. Look, like, don't think that like, oh, like you, like, oh, I just got away scot-free. Like, no, you act up, you get disciplined. And I really appreciate that our culture is very big on discipline. I might not necessarily agree with some modes of discipline personally, but I do think that like there's a place and time for everything. Being saying that, oh, like, as much as like, when you're growing up as a kid, like, oh, why do we always have to go to church all the time? Like, oh my God. But like, as an adult, you appreciate that you were given the opportunity to be able to be in that environment, so that when you're an adult now, you can have a relationship with God and you can see the importance of that for yourself, that personal relationship, right? You can see like, wow, why did mom make us get up early and clean the house? Okay, well, you can realize how important like a clean space is for yourself, right? So I think that like, I'm not negating the fact that we should discipline our kids, or we should, because I feel like sometimes when I talk to some parents, are like, well, I don't want to be their friend, and then they don't do what they need to do, or they don't like respect me, or they don't like show up as they should. And I'm like, no, your kid will actually show up more. And that like the barriers of like, oh, I can't talk to daddy or mommy, or the things you're worried about. For example, substance use is something that I've actually forgotten to mention. It's something that's actually on the rise. A lot of kids are using marijuana, they're vaping, they're using like nicotine. And like, we think, oh, our kids are exempted from that. They are doing it, they're just not telling you. And like, it's so important, because the thing is, it's so important to have those conversations. Number one, yes, from the outside perspective, I am so against like, let's cut down substance use. Like, marijuana is not good for you. I will get into that some other time, not today. Like, all these substances are not good for you in the long run. But at least if you know that your kid is using it, you can at least start to have that conversation with them and be like, hey, even if you don't believe me and you think it's cool, then these are the consequences of you doing this. Like in the long run, it can affect your brain, your ability to retain, to concentrate, to focus. It can cause a lot of like medical issues down the line. You can use the opportunity to educate them, right? But like if we're not having the conversation about them, we talk about even like sexual orientation. That's another big thing that a lot of parents are not talking about, and becoming more prevalent in our community, like the LGBTQ plus community. It's kind of like just allowing your kids to have those conversations with you at home, like, hey mom, like this is happening at school, or even like when we talk about sexuality. So like when people have like start having like getting older, they start having relationships. We don't really kind of talk a lot about that in our communities. We just kind of hush about it. So like, your kids are like doing all this stuff. They are having like sexual relationship. They are doing a lot of things, but they're not letting you know. And like, I think that like, that's such a dangerous thing to not have those conversations early on, because guess what? The world is having that conversation with them. They're learning about it on social media. They're learning about it in school. Like, yes, we had the sex talk in school. They're going to teach you about it. But why don't you let that conversation come from you first, so that you get to set the standard of what it should be like, rather than the world setting the standard? Because when they've heard it from the world, they've heard it from school, they've heard it from social media, they've heard it from everywhere else. By the time you'll come in, it's too late. At that point, you're just like, anything you're saying, they're like, okay, yeah, sure, sounds good. So I think that like being an ally, like, is so important. Like listening to your kid, talking to them, understanding them, validating them, allowing rooms for their fears, their concerns. Like if your kid is telling you, oh, like mom, I don't think I can really do this nursing thing. Say, oh, why don't you think you can do it? Oh, mom, I'm really bad at math. Okay, if you really want to do nursing, we can get you extra up at math. But if your kid says, oh, mom, I don't want to do this nursing thing, you're like, oh, no, you have to. Everyone has to, like, blah, blah, blah. You're not listening to them. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, when people say they don't want to do things or they're struggling, there's a root cause. There's a reason why. If I'm telling you, oh, I'm feeling very anxious, why? Oh, at school, people make fun of me. Oh, like, I'm sorry that you feel that way. Like, what are they making fun of you for? If it's your hair, okay, how do you feel about it? Do you feel like maybe I can do something better with your hair? Is there certain hairstyles that makes you feel more comfortable? Or something like my brother and his friends would say was like growing up, like their parents used to make them cut their hair too low, and like they used to feel like, oh, as a kid, like I don't want to be too bald. It's like asking them, like, hey, from the parents' perspective, they're like, of course you don't want the hair to be overgrown because then it looks unkept. But like saying, okay, like we can have a medium where it's not too low, it's not too high, you can kind of, but like if you don't talk to the kid to find out what it is, like, or even people be like, I wanted to play sports, but then my parents were like, oh no, like focus on like school. And it's like, okay, like if you want to play sports, I can support you, but you also have to understand that education is priority because of blah, blah, blah. Like explain it to your kid, like, and if you don't understand something, saying, oh, I don't know, but I can find out, or we can look into it together, or, apologizing too. Something that like a lot of immigrant parents don't do is apologize. Like if you've hurt your kid's feelings, saying, oh, I'm sorry that happened, or not. Like the other day I was like on the phone with someone and something was happening, their kids were arguing, and I was like, oh, like I know what you're trying to do, but that other kid probably felt a certain way, because then you're saying because you're the older sibling, you should do this. No, the older siblings' feelings matter too, So conflict resolution. So going back and being like, okay, yeah, this is not okay. You both apologize to one another and then move forward from that. So even in the dynamics of like our parents treat certain kids over the other, those little things matter, right? Like I know parents say they don't have favorites, but everyone knows that parents at least have one child that is their favorite. Making sure that you're not neglecting your other kids, like, it's so important, because neglect is such a very, very like dangerous thing that can happen. And when it happens over time, it builds up and it can cause like some damage to like your emotional and mental well-being. So that's why I always say, like, pay attention to like, all these things. But my biggest tip for parents too, and I'm gonna end it here, is you can't give what you don't have, right? So I always say to parents that if you're not taking care of yourself, it's hard for you to fully take care of your own kids, to even show up in your relationship with your partner, or to show up in your relationship with your parents or your siblings. So I feel like a lot of parents, they work really hard, they're really tired, they're burnt out. So when they come home, they have a short fuse. Like, yeah, I don't want to hear about your day. I just want to eat, go to bed because I have work in the morning, or I'm working nights, or I'm working days. Like, so we ourselves are not taking care of ourselves. So you can't be a great parent if you yourself are not emotionally or mentally okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're not also mentally or emotionally taking care of yourself. So my biggest tip is, I always tell people that, like, if you keep going and going and going and going and going, like, eventually you run on empty, and like you're not really giving anything. If anything, you're making things worse, right? So
Yeah.
please, I want to encourage all parents or aunties and uncles or anyone listening, is like, you take care of yourself as well. Going back to, we were talking about like being Christians earlier. The Bible says that you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. And if you don't love yourself, you can't really love your neighbor properly. And that's just the reality. And that's why God put it that way, right? He didn't say like love your neighbor, then love yourself. He says that love your neighbor as you love yourself, because there's that assumption that you should have loved yourself. And part of loving yourself is taking care of yourself, is making sure that you yourself, you're okay, you're checking in. Hey, Tolu, have you really, like, slept properly? Have you kind of like done things that made you really happy? Like, if you like watching like movies, maybe taking an hour to just watch a movie to make you laugh, to make you smile. If you like getting your nails done, or like, you like watching soccer or hanging out with your boys, like whatever it is that you like doing, have you actually done something for yourself that week? So that now when your kids come and they're like, oh, mommy, daddy, like, I want to talk about this. Now, because you're relaxed, your cup is filled, you're like, oh yeah, let's talk about it. But if yourself, you're running on empty, you're like, please, like, I don't have the fuse. So in order to even be better parents, in order to be able to be better allies, we also ourselves have to be healthy, right? And like when we think about allyship, like we think about like a position of like, for you to be an ally, you have to be in a position where you yourself, you have like a good standing, right? Like I can't be an ally with someone when me myself I'm struggling. Like, like what?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what am I giving? So like in the same way as parents, like let's make sure that we also take care of ourselves. Like we make sure that we show up for ourselves, we take care of ourselves, we pay attention to what we need, to our own emotional, mental well-being. A lot of kids will tell me like, yeah, I remember mommy not being happy when I was growing up. I remember her often always being in our room, sad all the time, crying, or daddy constantly being angry. Why wouldn't daddy be angry? Because he's worked like so many hours, like he's tired, right? Like he doesn't want to talk to you. Or why wouldn't mommy be sad? Because there's a lot of things happening that doesn't really like make sense. So all of this to say that like we can focus on the youths, but in order to be like a good parent or a good like mentor to anybody, you have to take care of yourself first. So the job starts with all of our individual selves. And when we do that too, you model something that your kids can look at. They can be like, oh, once a week, like I know my mom always goes and like does this for herself. She always goes once a month to get a massage. She always goes and like spends time with her friends, or she always like does things for herself. So when I'm growing up, I know like this is what I want to do for myself.
Take care of myself. Yes.
About like going to bed at a reasonable time, or I know that mommy doesn't play about doing certain things, or dad doesn't like play about like watching soccer on Saturday mornings. Like that's that special time. Like doing things for yourself, so that when your kids see that, even the way you talk to your partners, you talk to your friends, you talk to people, your kids and your adult children are watching and they model that relationship, right? Like that's why it's so important. I was talking about foundation earlier. Whatever foundation you set in their home is what your kids end up carrying. That's how I was talking about conflict or a safe, secure attachment, or all these things, because your kids are learning from you. So if you yourself, you're a more anxious person, so moms are always so worried about every little thing. Oh, don't do this, don't do that. Oh my God, you're gonna fall, you're gonna do this. Then your kid is gonna grow up being more anxious, because they're gonna be like, oh, my mom was always so worried about this. So subsequently, I also grew up being more worried about things, right? If my mom is always like so paranoid, like I always laugh because sometimes in our Nigerian culture, if people are like traveling, they don't tell anyone. And I'm like, oh, the plane is going to fly regardless. Or like, if my mom grew up like being more secretive, and like, there's like, oh, if stuff is going on or there's a big fight, don't tell anybody. This stays within the family. That kid grows up, and when they need help, it's difficult for them to ask for help, because you want them to like not speak up, to like not say anything, right? But whereas if you empower your kid, like, hey, if something is happening, tell me, speak up. If they've seen you model that behavior, they also learn. So sometimes too, it's not all the talking and the speaking, is also how you model behavior to your kids and to your loved ones and to your mentors. So the work is not only just for the youth, it's also for us as parents, as
adults. I totally
to actually do the work on ourselves. So yeah, let me stop there. Even though I'll keep going.
Thank you. Oh my God, we've spent 1 hour and it's like we've been here for just 15 minutes.
Oh my God, yeah.
So it's quite an interesting topic, and thank you so much. You've shared so much with us. There's so much nugget to take away, even for me as a parent dealing with my. I now have teenagers. I have a teenager and I have an adult.
Oh
So
wow.
dealing
Great
with
age.
them, yeah.
Yeah.
So I've learned so much today. So definitely we're going to have a part two because there were
Yeah.
things I wanted us to talk about that we did not get to today. So, but before I let you go, before we eventually end today's session, one last question for you, and that is how do we, what are the traits, what are those things that factors that we would see in our child, our youth, our young adults that requires us to kind of, that red bulb or alarm in our head to say, you know what, I think there's something not adding up. I think there's an issue. I think there's something we need to address. I think there's this child is going through something. What are those similar things based on you've dealt with a lot of youths? What are
Yeah.
the things that we should look out for as parents?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think that's a great question to end on, right? I think some of the main things to look for, biggest thing would be if there's a sudden change in like a parent, like a your child's like demeanor or like their mood, right? I would talk to parents sometimes in the hospital, and they will be like, "Oh yeah, they were usually an happy kid, and then like when they started grade 9, they started being more withdrawn. They would stay in their room all the time." Or when they move to a new school, or when they move to a new country, or whatever it is, right? Like there's always like a transition where, and that's why it's important to also know your kid and pay attention to them, and you know them by talking to them, right? So understanding when there's like a sudden change in their behavior or their mood. So everyone is different, right? Like depression, anxiety, mental health disorders, they present similarly most of the time, but also differently in a lot of different people. So some people are more irritable, they start to like snap more. Your kid that's usually very well behaved, more polite, they start to talk back, they start to get so angry, like the littlest things make them really really angry, like or your kid that's always so happy, all of a sudden they're in their room, they don't come down for dinner, they're not really talking as much, they're not hanging out with their friends, they're not wanting to do things that they usually like to do. So maybe they like to like play sports. All of a sudden they're like, "Oh, I don't want to play sports anymore," or "I don't want to hang out with that friend anymore." Just like, or like even making sure that like, or if they're not sleeping, they just seem more tired, they're not eating. That usually like you're making their favorite food, and they're like, "No, I don't want that," or "I've changed my taste palette," or whatever it is. And they can go through changes. I mean, as teenagers, they're always gonna go through phases where like they do some of these things. But when you start noticing that it's been like 3 weeks and 4 weeks and a month, and like my kid is not like this usually. They're not this withdrawn. They're not this angry, or they're not this sad. Or when they start saying certain statements like, "Oh, I don't want to be anymore. What's the point of everything?" Like paying attention to the things they're saying and how they're saying it. Or if like they were your kid that they said they had a lot of dreams, they wanted to do this, do that, everyone has that one kid who wants to like change the world, and all of a sudden they're like, "No, actually, I don't want to do all of that anymore." There's a change in their dreams, there's a change in their ability, there's a change in their concentration, there's a change in like their overall mood. Those are like very key indicators that something is going on here, right? That is not adding up. And like the first thing you do is, or sometimes the extreme thing that we always look for, and like you should absolutely just bring your kid in, is if you notice that like they've said that, "Oh, I'm just gonna kill myself," or you've noticed that certain things. So I always tell parents, like especially if your kids are still younger, like kind of paying attention. If you start seeing certain like cuts on their arms, on their wrists, because apparently people cutting themselves is becoming trendy these days. So like if you start seeing like a lot of things on like their wrists, on their arms, or like you start noticing the kind of music they listen to is different. So if your kid usually likes like a certain upbeat music or certain TV shows, and you start noticing that okay, they are watching things that is not according to what they usually do, like those are indicators that something is going on, and you should start by having the conversation. And a
Okay.
lot of times people will not open up right away, right? But you have to be persistent. And sometimes if you try the gentle approach and it doesn't work, then take the firm approach, right? Like, I mean, it's true. Like, as their parent, at least up until 18 and maybe older too, you still have like that right and autonomy over them to be like, "Hey, you're not doing well, you're sad, and I'm gonna get you help, right? Like sometimes you don't leave them the option. Like I talked about being your friend to your kid and being an ally. But sometimes when people are so sad and like they're so anxious and there's a lot of things that they're just like, no, there's no point, because hopelessness is part of these things where they don't feel like there's anything left living for. So it's up to you to kind of just be an ally, to be like, hey, no, we're gonna get you help. Like I'm gonna bring you in and we're gonna talk to someone. In school, if they start like noticing that their grades are dropping and like this is a top A student, and grades can drop for like a lot of different reasons, right? You start noticing that like they're not really be like having the same grades, or like there's a lot of complaints at school, they're not focusing, they're not concentrating. If they have a job by the time they're like 15, 16, they don't want to go to work anymore, or they're always complaining about like so many things that it's so unlike them, right? So the key thing is, even like clinically when we assess people is, has there be a change from your baseline? Your baseline meaning like your normal day-to-day, your usual self, right? Like has there be a change in who you used to be compared to what you are demonstrating now? Like what symptoms and what characteristic you're presenting now? That's like the biggest indicator that something else is going on, right? So if I'm like usually like, oh, it's always like usually like, okay, happy person, blah, 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 this and that, all of a sudden I'm like in my room all the time, I'm not going out, all that stuff. That's a change from my baseline, because then that means that something else is going on. So for example, if your kid is a top A student and they're not doing well all of a sudden, and it's been going on for weeks, and you've kind of talked to them, there's a stressor. So for example, a stressor meaning that like if there's like a sudden loss, right? Or nowadays as kids get older, they start getting relationships and all that stuff, or they break up with their boyfriend or their girlfriend or their friends, they stop being friends with their friends as well. That's a big one. People don't pay attention to that. It's like, as teenagers or as young adults or as youths, our friendship mean a lot to us. So when you have a fight with your friend or you're not talking with your friend, you start to act different, right? So like change from a baseline and any significant stressors, those are like meaning that like if a family member has died or someone is really sick or something is going on that's significant in their life that can affect the way they behave or they interact, those are things to look for. And that's a way to be like, let's get you some help.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been an amazing session. Like I feel like we should just keep going and going and going and going and going, because the more we talk, the more things kind of surface up, and the things that I would really love us to talk about. But like I said, it's past an hour.
Yeah.
And I know that today's your rest day. We don't want to take much more than we've done already. Thank you so much, Dr. Tolu, for coming on board with us today. It means a lot to us that you're able to share from your wealth of knowledge. And, it's been amazing. We're going to have another, we're telling you now.
Yes, I am. I'm on board. Yeah, just let me know. Yeah, we'll figure it out. Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to come on. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy. I'm very passionate about mental health, and it's something that matters to me. So I'm really always excited to have any opportunity to share from my little like knowledge base. I'm still learning myself. There's a lot of things to learn still. But no, I really appreciate the platform that you've created and like this great initiative. Like I was telling you earlier before we started, I wish I had something like this when I was growing up, because that would have been very helpful. So I really think it's very important. I appreciate you and I commend you for like starting this and bridging the gap, because this is such a big need. And I can't wait for other things that, your organization, this foundation is going to do. I think it's going to be phenomenal. So I'm happy to be rooting and supporting from the sidelines, and wherever where you guys need me, I'm here. So
thank you.
Yeah,
it's always amazing when we hear things like this, because sometimes it can be a lot. It can be a lot. You know how it is in Canada. And you're thinking of, okay, do I want to take a step back? But when we hear comments like this, especially, I was telling you about the youth ambassadors. They've been amazing. They've been doing excellent work. And for me, it means a lot, because like I said, parents don't want to put their kids out there.
Yeah.
Kids don't want to also, put themselves out there.
Yeah.
They're exceptional. So for me, it's a privilege to have young adults, teenagers willing to give back
Yeah.
the way they do. So thank you. So one of those is we have a session and we'll have you come in and probably hang out with the
Oh
elephant
yes, of course. I
ambassadors.
would love to. Yeah, I would love
Yeah.
to.
So
Just
thank
let
you
me know.
so
Yeah.
much. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for being here. Thank you for yielding to a call. Thank you for the time that you've spent, and thank you for all the golden nuggets. Right. This is a recorded session, so it's going to be live on YouTube, and that's the joy, because people can always go back and watch and share within new immigrants coming in and all that. Thank you once again,
No,
and
thank you. Thank you. Oh my God. No, thank you so much. It's such an
have a
honor to
good
be here.
rest of your day, and thank
Thank
you
you.
everyone that have joined us, and those that will watch this later on. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.